These are the Lewis 6-piston downhill brakes, or even e-moto brakes. It's hard to tell exactly what they're for, but these are a very interesting brake. And now when I say 6-piston, I'm referring to the caliper, which normally for downhill type and enduro type riding, yeah, we usually see 4-piston brakes. These have 6 pistons, 2 more, and more pistons is more better, right? Now, like I said in my last Lewis video, Dale has created a very good history of Lewis video. If you're not familiar with Lewis, the brand, you should just go watch that video because it explains everything in a ton of detail about who the brand are. So yeah, go check that out if you want to learn more about Lewis. And I like to start all my reviews with just the conclusion now. These are solid brakes. They're interesting, but they're not for me. And they're not exactly what you'd expect, I think, from seeing a 6-piston brake. So let's talk about it. Okay, let's start up here with the lever. Now the levers that this set come with are the LHP Plus. Now these are the same ones that I tested before with my LHP Plus brakes, which are another 4-piston one. You can go check out that review. And so yes, they're the same, very nicely machined, very aesthetic brake lever. And they've got all the same sort of features and cool things you can do with them. Like we've got a toolless reach adjust. You can just spin this thing around and adjust the reach. And then inside that reach adjust, which unfortunately is this little 2mm nub and Allen key, you can tighten a little bolt in here and adjust the bite points. And then what is really tricky about these brakes, or the trick they have up their sleeve, is you can adjust the leverage ratio of the brake lever by spinning this knob here. And what that leverage ratio does is make your brakes feel either more Shimano-esque or more Code-esque, I guess. Do you want that kind of softer, more modulation feel, or do you want that firmer bite point, more aggressive bite feel? That's what this does here, and you can, adjust it anywhere in between. Basically get your brakes feeling exactly the way you want. A nice touch they've done since I reviewed the last set is they've added a little dot here and some markings so that you can make sure that the brakes are set how you want. So before there was no dot and no markings, you kind of would just set the leverage ratio somewhere that felt right. But it's nice now, you can make sure that you set both front and rear levers to be exactly the same, because if you're like me, I like to have the front and rear brake pretty much feel as close to as possible to each other. And so yeah, it's very nice that you can actually set, okay, I'm in the big dash position now on both levers. And like I said, the levers, I think they look great. They look very familiar, but they feel solid as well. No real complaints about the lever. They feel good, they look good, they're nice and aesthetic, especially in this shiny silver. Again, one thing I would like is in the lever blades, maybe a bit of grip here. When my fingers get sweaty, it gets pretty slippery up in here, so not the end of the world, but I would like maybe just some dimpling there or something. Another different feature that these brakes had that the last set didn't is these reusable barbs. So I think we're used to seeing, the banjo with the bolt on the caliper side. This has the same sort of banjo fitting on the hose, and then this other sort of threaded barb that you put onto the lever side. So it's nice when you're feeding the brake through the frame or what have you, you just unthread the barb and olive and then thread it through, then you thread it back on. You don't need to get your press out and cut and press things and crush the olive in the thing. Yeah, this is just a much more elegant solution. Okay, but we've seen all this before. Let's go look at the caliper and its crazy pistons. All right, coming down to this S6 caliper, it is a very cool looking caliper. It's huge. It's got these big metal fins on it, and yeah, it looks cool. Now, like the LHP Plus that I reviewed before, these fins are integrated into the caliper itself. So the pads are their own thing, and then the fins are part of the caliper. And then speaking of pads, these use, I think it's their own proprietary brake pad. It's basically like a very long version of a normal brake pad. Yeah, it's big. And these brakes are surprisingly quiet in that nothing really rattles. You'd think with these big fins or something would be rattling around in there. But yeah, generally pretty quiet brakes. I did just ride a really big descent with these brakes, and I do think that the heat dissipation offered by maybe the big fins or the bigger caliper or the bigger brake pads actually did something, because I felt like it wasn't until the very end that I noticed any change in the way the brakes feel. And yeah, we were doing a very steep, very long descent, and yeah, couldn't believe that, okay, the brakes are actually doing totally fine, because no brakes should survive that descent without getting pretty hot. So they do seem to have good heat dissipation. Now let's talk about how they actually feel to ride. I think because you have 6 pistons and you need more fluid to move those pistons, and the ratio of the lever, maybe something's going on there. There's a lot of free throw. So to engage the brakes, basically you've got to pull the lever through a ton of dead stroke. And that's with the bite point adjusted all the way in. I've tried bleeding them more. I've tried even trying to push the pistons out with the wheel off and everything to try and get the bite point to be a little bit shorter. But I really couldn't figure anything out to make that bite point a little bit better. And again, because you're moving so much fluid, the bite point is quite soft. So I tried, again, bleeding them, keeping the levers, compressed overnight, all those usual kinds of tricks. But yeah, at the end of the day, they're always just gonna feel pretty soft, I think. The actual feel of the dead stroke is probably more Shimano-esque. It's not like a very stiff free throw or anything like that, but of course it's not as light as something like Hayes. Another place where these brakes actually do really well is there's a ton of modulation. So again, because I think there's so much fluid, you end up getting a very linear brake feel. And so, yeah, when it comes time to actually modulate, whether that's doing a stoppie or not having your rear brake lock up, yeah, they offer a ton of modulation and it's pretty good. And when I say it's pretty good modulation, I guess a brake can have a lot of modulation, but it's still hard to control. Like imagine a very weak brake would have a ton of modulation, and the opposite end of that, a brake that just engages super fast would have, bad modulation or what have you. I would say when it comes to, say, doing a stoppie down something, I prefer the modulation on these brakes over, say, something like Hayes, but that comes at a cost. I think, ironically, these brakes don't have a ton of top-end power. They do have good top-end power, but really not as much as you might think. I would say they feel more like my Meagher MT7s, or maybe a little bit less than my Shimano XTs. I think I was hoping when I got these that these would be more along the lines of Maven in terms of top-end power, like almost too much power. But yeah, it's actually the other way. I do wish they had more top-end stopping power. And now I'm not an engineer, well, not this kind of engineer, but I think maybe you could get there by adjusting the ratio of the master cylinder piston to the pistons in these calipers. Maybe someone who knows more about brakes could put it down in the comments if you know how to, firm up a brake by designing it differently. So all that to say, a lot of modulation that comes at the cost of you having to squeeze pretty hard if you want to get a lot of top-end power and you need to really stop with these brakes. So who are these brakes for? Well, they're for someone who wants a very cool looking brake with a lot of modulation, but someone who also doesn't mind a lot of dead stroke. Someone who needs a good amount of top-end power, but isn't looking for the most powerful brake out there. Or maybe someone whose brakes are just always heating up because these things are huge with huge fins and they're gonna stay cool a little bit longer than those other brakes out there. Also for someone who wants to do a lot of adjustment on their brakes and play around and fiddle, but are also okay with a pretty soft bite point. And lastly, I should have mentioned this set is mineral oil. So that's it for the Lewis 6-piston brake review. Let me know if I missed anything or if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.